Hi, my name is Nan Cohen, and I'm with Light Productions and the producer of Light Television. And I want to welcome you to another fun evening with the Coyote Rabbi Gershon Winkler, who's from New Mexico, who comes to us from New Mexico. Gershon has titled this talk, Women as Prophets, Warriors, and Shamans in the Ancient Jewish Tradition. And he writes that he introduces us to a parade of wild, daring women in the Jewish tradition, who are tricksters, spiritual leaders, policymakers, generals, magicians par excellence, healers, and prophets, often changing outright the course of Jewish history and religious policy in an ancient culture that honored the wisdom of the feminine. Ancient Israelite women, wrote one feminist writer in the late 70s, fared better than modern Western women. And that's from Religion and Sexism. Find out how. Find out now. Here's Rabbi.
Good evening. This is the word for woman in ancient Hebrew. This is ancient Hebrew script. The more common Hebrew script would go like this. Oops. Get the two mixed up all the time. There. Isn't that cute? So this is post-Babylonian exile Hebrew script from 500 BCE and on to this very day. And this is the pre-Babylonian exilic Hebrew from the time of Abraham through Moses, through the prophets up into Isaiah, Jeremiah. And both of these words are the word for a woman, which is tonight's topic is what? The women prophets? The women prophets? Prophetesses? In the Hebrew, you would write prophetess like this. This is prophetess. Neviah. Neviah. The word for a woman is Isha. Isha. Neviah, Isha. Or in ancient Hebrew, let's see. And then we have Yud. Sorry. A little rusty, it's been 3,000 years. There you go. Neviah. These are the different ways in which we write. Neviah literally means she who brings. From the word lahavi. Lahavi means to bring. She who brings the vision to the people. And Isha literally means the sacred fire. See? Because if you cover up the hay, you have the word esh, which means fire. Isha is sacred fire. It's mentioned throughout the Torah in the books of Leviticus, where they talk about different offerings. One of the offerings was called the Isha, which means the fire offering. The fire offering. And the fire offering is spelled exactly like the word for woman in Hebrew. So woman was the fire offering. That's why she's the one who lights the fire. When the Sabbath comes, the woman lights the fire. In New Agey Jewish communities, everybody wants to be egalitarian, so the women light the candles for Shabbat and the men light the candles for Shabbat. I'm totally not into that. I think it takes away from the original intention and power that was understood by the ancients, that was exclusively hers. She lights the fire. Cut it out, boys. You have enough to do. You can bring the beer. She lights the fire. Isha. In fact, the word for maid servant in the English translations in the Bible really means the one who tends to the embers. It was a woman, and her job, her role was tending the embers of the fire, keeping the fire going. So what was the word for maid servant, or handmaiden as you read it in the English translations? Like Hagar, who was later became the second wife to Abraham. So before that, her role was as Shifcha. She was Sarah's Shifcha. So the translations in the English by people who don't know anything about us was, like a servant. But actually it was a lot more than a servant. So let's look at this in the Hebrew and you'll see what I mean. Okay? Shifcha. Maid servant, as they say. Shifcha. Now, what does this mean? Well, if you change the vowels, you have shepacha. Hach means ember. Shepacha means the one who tends the embers. That was her role. That was her job, to keep the place warm, to keep the fire going, especially in the ancient times, thousands of years ago, when they couldn't just flick of the switch and turn the fire on. The one who kept the fire going was a very sacred role. It was a very special skill to keep the fire going. In fact, in the ancient teachings of the rabbis in the Talmud, they talk about the clan of Avtinus in the 1st century BC EFG. The clan of Avtinus. They were a clan of Hebrews whose women held the mystery of the incense. And the only way that they would bring the incense to the temple for the smoke offering was through the clan of Avtinus and their women. Nobody else knew the mystery of the incense. When the clan of Avtinus, at the turn of the millennium at that time, or according to the secular accounting, was the turn of the millennium. So what happened at that point was that the temple became very corrupt under the control of the Sadducees, a sect of the Jewish people that were collaborating with the Romans and were commercializing the Holy Temple. So in the year 23, the rabbis, the Pharisees, left the temple and moved to Yavna, established their supreme court in Yavna in the hills beyond Jerusalem, and left Jerusalem. The clan of Avtinus refused. When the sages left the temple and said, we don't want to have anything to do with this temple anymore, the clan of Avtinus, and the women of Avtinus, refused to expose to the Sadducean priesthood the mystery of the incense. And so they couldn't do the incense right. The smoke would go like this, like that. It would have to, but the way it had to go was totally straight up, unencumbered by breeze or anything. And only the clan of Avtinus, the women of Avtinus, were the only ones who held the secret of how to do that. They refused. And so then the rabbis came to them and said, we're very glad that you're no longer giving them the secrets, but will you tell it to us so that we could continue the teachings about, in case we can get control of the temple again sometime in the future? And the daughters of the clan of Avtinus said, no way, Jose. And And the rabbi said, why? And they said, because the time of the temple has come to a close. So have we been taught by our teachers in our clan, by our elders. And sure enough, the temple fell about 55 years later. So the shifcha, shepacha, one who tends the fire, who tends the esh, the isha, and the esh, fire, isha is sacred fire. Shifcha, who tends the fire, or literally the embers. Now watch this. You add another letter to this word, you have the letter mem, you have the word mishpacha, which means what? Family, exactly. See? So the shifcha, mishpacha, means of the embers, because it was the embers that brought the family together. It brought the people together. So what created the family was the fire. Didn't have a fire, nobody would come and visit you. Nobody would sit around to eat with you. You had no fire. So this is what drew the fire. The woman drew the fire, created the fireplace, created the fire circle, brought the people together, brought the clan together, brought the family together. Mishpacha, shifcha, all the same words from the word pach. This is the root word right here, pach, which means ember. So remember the ember, pach, mishpacha, shifcha, and so on and so forth. And isha, woman, is fire. Isha, fire, fire. Look at all that fire. You got all that? Can we erase it? Should I now teach you the alphabet in ancient Hebrew? Should I draw a cartoon? I brought with me some water. This is very special water. This is water from the sacred fires, our tradition. The ancient teachers in our tradition tell us that Kemo hanavi'im kein hanavi'ot, which means as the prophets, so the prophetesses. Meaning, as many male prophets as there were in ancient Israel, there were just as many women prophets. Now, the average bloke assumes that all the prophets and prophetesses in the Jewish tradition are exclusively the ones that got public relations, that got written up in the Holy Bible, that got written up in the Scriptures. But this is not the way we were raised. We have a written tradition, we have an oral tradition. The written tradition is more like the Scriptures, the written Scriptures, which is about the thing. It's T-H-I-N-G, which is about the prophet. She's making me laugh. Paula.
Sorry.
You'll have to leave. Sorry. The written tradition is like the historic record of and writings of those whose prophecies had to do with the future destiny of the people of the nation to the end of time, which is tomorrow at 3 p.m. I forgot to tell you. I just got an email. And the oral tradition, though, continues to tell us about it. And also, in fact, in the written tradition as well, there is a lot of mention, like in the book of Samuel, for example, in the very beginning. There's a lot of mention of prophets with no names. In the book of Kings, there's a story about a prophet, no name. There's a story about a prophetess, no name. There are lots of people who are just mentioned without name because their role in the story, in the scriptures, was not about anything having to do with the future destiny of the people. It had to do with the moment, in this moment. And so therefore they didn't get like canonized or anything like that, because the scriptures were about the future and the guidelines of how to walk into that future from the time that they were written. So the oral tradition tells us there were as many, there are indication, even in the written scriptures, that there were just as many women prophets as there were men prophets. That it's not to be judged by who got written, who got named, who got mentioned. The ones that did get mentioned, among the women prophets that have names, yes?
I want to ask a question at this point.
At this point.
Because, you know, there in the outside world, outside of this room, where you're talking about, you know, this disparity, and there's this. You've never heard your side, what you're saying right now, and the feminists are always talking about the male patriarchal religion that oppressed women.
Mm-hmm.
So you're coming up with, at least I'm sort of hearing a different side to the story.
Yeah, that's right.
Women had a much stronger role than what is being let on.
That's right.
How come it got buried?
It didn't. I grew up with it. It's just
okay. How come it got buried for most of us?
Oh, because in most of most of our people have been raised totally unexposed to our tradition. Because when many of our grandparents came to this country from Eastern Europe and other places where they were being very severely oppressed, they decided that, they're in America now. They can be like everybody else. They won't bother us anymore. And so they just put away all the stuff, anything having to do with our religion or spirituality, and just to try to become Americans, become part of the culture in an attempt to evade the Jewish identity, which had only caused them so much trouble. And so the Reform movement began in Eastern Europe and in Germany, actually, in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and then later the conservative movement. You know, all kinds of movements began to try to narrow Judaism down to a Protestant religion, as opposed to the Jewish religion. To narrow it down, become a Occidental, Western, European religion, as opposed to its Oriental, Middle Eastern origin. And so a lot of the teachings that went along with that are so good and empowering to women and to men, and mysticism and all that stuff just got thrown out, like the old proverbial baby with the bathwater thing.
So, is that a song request?
Thank you.
That's going to help you.
Tell me, remember what I'm supposed to talk about?
What you wanted to talk about.
Yes. Let's see. Yeah, well, I'm going to get there. I really am.
Fine, I just wanted to help.
Yeah, thank you, because I appreciate that, because there's a quote here from a book called Sexism and Religion. It was published by Simon and Schuster, I think it was, or Simon and Garfunkel, I'm not sure. So there's a quote there from one of the feminist writers. It says, "Ancient Israelite women fared better than modern Western women." You know, and this is that she had, what she did was take the dive into the ancient sources instead of just assuming by how people were living and judging everything by cliches and stereotypifications and archetypes and stuff like that. She went into she examined, asked questions, examined the English translations that she found of the Talmud, and stuff like that, and the scriptures itself, and realize that it's the farther back you go, the more empowered the women were in the society, not just among the Jews, but among the Greco-Romans and among the Greeks, the Romans, the people in India, the Hindus, depending where you go. Things changed over the years because we are very much influenced by the cultures around us and very ignorant of our own way.
So this was a lot of, so I'm going to blame or ask a question. They blamed it possibly Catholicism or Christianity?
I don't know. Well, in the book?
Which really appears, even in its writings, to make women's role second class or second rate.
Well, you'd have to talk to a minister about that. I'm just here to talk about the Jewish part.
Okay, all right. I'm just
not
wondering,
here
if this got so, where did
well,
the balance take place?
There's a book called Witch Craze by Professor Anne Llewellyn Barstow. It was published by HarperCollins 5 years ago, where she writes. Where does she write? She writes about the witch hunts and how women were going underground. Wise women were going underground in the early Middle Ages through till modern times, because of the severe persecution of women by the church for the practice of witchcraft or suspicion thereof, mostly for other reasons. Then she writes like this, and she comes into the Jews, and she writes, women as a gender group suffered a special liability in that they had begun to be identified with Jews. Both groups suffered from being associated with magical practices, making potions and poisons, wearing amulets, sticking pins in dolls. We didn't do that, we just made dolls. Having abnormal knowledge about dreams, fortune-telling, or the magical properties of gems. Rumors circulated about their bodies that both women and Jews could turn themselves into animals. For the most part, however, witches and Jews were persecuted interchangeably. Both witches and Jews were perceived as traitors to Christian society who must be eradicated. So, I mean, if you study the history of much of the church, there was a big discrepancy between the church and Christianity. I mean, there were a lot of Christians who were persecuted by the church for being true Christians, as opposed to the power of the government that became the church. Anyway, I'm just going to share with you some of this stuff to teach the tradition, the teachings from the tradition and from our history about the prophets and prophetesses and healers, women healers and women's, yes.
I have 2 questions. Yeah, I can buy the idea of the prophetess and, that, because, I know about that. Were there ever any Jewish women who were rabbis?
Yes, I'm getting to everything.
Oh, good.
So if you just hang in there, we'll get to it all.
Also, when
yes.
did that notion of the goddess change from, did we become a masculine form?
I never did. It really hasn't.
Was it always masculine or feminine?
No, it was always masculine and feminine, to this very day. And to this very day, when Jews go to welcome the Sabbath, what do they say? They say, Boi Kala, Boi Shabbat Malkata, which is an old remnant of the Hebrew goddess, which means, here she comes, come, O bride, come, O Sabbath queen, which is a remnant of the Queen of Heaven that one of our goddesses that we worship in the ancient times, one of the manifestations of the divine that was part of Jewish worship in ancient times, up until the fall of the first temple, was, besides the Asherah, was also the queen of Malka de Shemaiah, the queen of the heaven, we call her, who then later became translated as the Shekhinah, and then later the Sabbath queen, and so on and so forth. Kind of got diminished more and more as we got into ways of life and cultural changes in the world there, where open goddess worship had become something of an anomaly. Here, let me indicate this on the white board. And we're going to actually, why don't you just let me get to it in order, and we'll cover it all, I promise it. And you know, it's so sad to me, familiar with these old sources, that you know, women rabbis is like this new thing, women rabbis. And it's even sadder that Orthodox Jews don't recognize the idea of women rabbis, when it was actually the only Jews that existed were Orthodox Jews until the 19th century, when you had Reform movement, and women rabbis existed. And I will now demonstrate all of them. Welcome. So first, let's go back to the prophetesses, and then move our way into our time, you know, through the centuries, to demonstrate all this from our history and from our tradition. What does that mean?
It means, I still have a question. Is there still the sect nowadays of the incense carrying?
I don't know. There's a group of women in Morocco who are called the Baalei Ketoret, the masters of the incense. And rumor has it, legend has it, that this clan of women are descendants of Aptinus. I don't know if they are for sure. I know a woman who studied with them. She's the wife of Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, Eve Ilson. She studied with these women in Morocco, and she makes a mean incense mixture. And the other one is Nan Cohen, who lives here in Missoula. I was walking down the street today minding my own business when all of a sudden I got me a whiff of some incredible stuff. And I walked across the street against the light. Cars are screeching to a halt. And I came right to her incense mixture. So yeah, who knows where they're from. And your last name is Cohen, and they were from the Kohanim. They were of the clan of the Kohanim, of the priests. That's right. So you never know. You could be a soul survivor. We're going to all visit you tonight, get the secrets out of you. Okay, so number one, the Talmud teaches us that there were as many women prophets as there were men prophets. Not all the men prophets got into the books. Not all the women prophets got into the books. In fact, the scriptures were totally not even a popular thing until later on. Mostly everything was oral tradition. Because if you think about it, how could written tradition be so popular in the ancient times when written was mostly, chipping away at a rock? It was hard to take notes back then. Slow down, you're too fast. I got the feist white in now. It'd be really hard. So it's mostly oral tradition. What we wrote down for the purpose of future generations being able to remember, like in a time capsule, just like they discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls. They discovered all these little bottles, Coke bottles with scriptures in them, old scriptures. So some of the women prophets that are known to us through the written tradition, there's like Sarah and Hagar and Rebecca and Leah and Serach, and not Sarah, Serach, who's the daughter of Asher, and Miriam and Deborah, Halifornis, who is the mother of Samson, and Huldah, and Hannah and Abigail, one of David's wives, and Esther, and those are some of the main women prophets. I would like to read to you something very sweet from the book of Zohar, one of the old Kabbalah texts, which is completely in Aramaic. So I'm going to read it to you in Aramaic, and hopefully you'll understand, because I don't. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, this is in the 2nd century, Shimon Bar Yochai is doing a journey, a shamanic journey. And he's doing a journey up the 7 heavenly chambers. There are 7 earthly chambers and 7 heavenly chambers. So he's doing a journey, sitting on the earth, meditating, drumming, chanting. He goes into this whole thing. If you want to read about the ancient shamanic journeys of the rabbis back then, you can read the Midrash HaHechalot, the Midrash of the Chambers, which is about shamanic journeying. It's one of those Midrashim, and recently you can find little translations in English here and there. So, here now, when he came back out of the vision, out of the journey, his disciples asked him, Master, what did you see? He says like this, Shis hecholim ichzili. I saw only 6 chambers. Kamo inugin bidunin. They were filled with light and pleasure, bliss. Vasade prochta prisha. And there was in each one a little slit in the veil from my universe to their universe, so I could see through it. And I realized, I felt that through those slits, through the veils of those particular 6 chambers, a man could not enter. So I could only look through. It's like my daughter, we went to this Sundance a few years ago. We were invited to come to a Sundance, Lakota Sundance. And they had a moon lodge for the women who were on the moon. I mean, women, Amazon women on the moon. You ever see that video? Women who had their period had to go in a lodge. They could not be near the sun dancers. So my little kid, who was about 5 at the time, I would walk her to get her toward her mother, who was in the moon lodge, and and she proudly would stop me at the top of the hill and say, "Okay, Dad, you can't go any further. This is only for women and girls." And there I was, feeling like an outcast. And she walked proudly down that hill to the moon lodge, where only she could go, and I was forbidden. And so Shimon Bar Yochai, in his shamanic journey through the 7 chambers, describes how he could not get into any of these 6 chambers that he saw. He could only look through the slit in the veil, as he puts it. So they asked him, what did you see through those veils? He says, Behechol achada, in the first chamber, is Batya bas Paro. I saw Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh. Batya is the name of the daughter of Pharaoh who takes Moses out of the water, out of the basket. Remember the movie, Prince of Egypt, the cartoon? So she pulls him out of the water, and she names him Moshe. Kimin hamayim ishisihu, because from the waters I drew him out. Moshe means to draw out. So she empowers him to draw out the people from Egypt later. She empowers him to draw water out of rock. So all he does in his whole journey with the Israelites is draw things out. He draws the divine revelation from the sky to the earth. He draws water from the stone. He draws the people out of Egypt. And that was because of his foster mother, Batya, who named him the drawer-outer, Moshe, which means drawer-outer. This was not his Hebrew name. His Hebrew name, the oral tradition tells us, was Avigdor, which is a Jewish name to this day. Avigdor means the father of structure, because his Jewish mother, Yocheved, empowered him with that. They were living in very tumultuous times, and she empowered him with becoming the master of the structure. And so he gives the people structure, the Torah. So both women empower this man. In fact, there were 7 women who were involved in enabling Moses to perform his mission of taking the Israelites out. I will talk about that later, if you remind me. The 7 women were Yocheved, his mother, because if she wouldn't have given birth to him, he couldn't have come here. Miriam, his sister, who was one of the leading prophetesses in our tradition, whose power it was to bring water to the people. She follows him as he's floating in the river. Remember the story? And then there's Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh, who takes him out. Then there are 2 midwives who refuse to throw the newborn male's children into the sea, into the river, as they were instructed by the Pharaoh. And then there was Tzipporah, Moses' wife, who saves his life when he's almost swallowed up by a strange spirit, and on his way to take the people out of Egypt. And then there is Sarah, the daughter of Asher, this strange prophetess we read about in the tradition and in the scriptures, and we don't know why. Who is she? She seems to be living everywhere. She's mentioned amongst the people who come into Egypt. She's mentioned amongst the people who leave Egypt 210 years later. Sarah, the daughter of Asher. Well, we'll find out who she is, because she's in one of the chambers. Okay, the first chamber, he says, I saw the daughter of the Pharaoh, Batya. V'chamo ribo ve'alfei noshin, and many tens of thousands of women, Zachyon bahada, who were very great and merited to be with her. V'chol chada v'chada minayhu, and each one of these women, duchtinin horin v'dunin, were basking in pleasure and light. Below duchakoklal isla, there was not any kind of sign or sense of anxiety or worry in that place. Zimnin b'chol yoma, and every single day, once a day, karozeach rizu, there is a voice that announces, Ho diyukna de Moshe neviya mehimana aseh. Behold, the image, the diokna, which means the spirit body of Moses, is coming. Ubasya nafkas, Batya, the daughter of Pharaoh, then rises from her throne, her place. Yasa de pagoda chadar isla, and she pulls aside of one of the veils. The Hamas, the Yukna Moshe, and she beholds the image, the spirit body of Moses. Usagiras the Gabe, she goes to him and embraces him. Yamra, and she cries out, Za'aka chulaki de rabisi de nehiruna. Oh, how lucky I am, says lucky, chulaki. Chulaki means my share. How lucky I am to have had a share in bringing this light into the world. And she then brings from back to the women pleasure and wisdom from her joy that she has. She then sits with all the women and they discuss the deep mysteries of the Torah. All these women are in the image that they were when they were in the physical world, except all light bodies, bodies of light. Even though many of them who were Jewish were not performing the precepts of the Torah that are exclusively for men, and women don't have to do them. But in that world, up there in that sixth chamber, they're all involved in all those instructions and doings that they did not do down in the earth. In this world. And all these women sit gathered around the daughter of Pharaoh. They're called women of tranquility. Back to the chambers of the women. The second chamber, you sit Asher, Sarah, the daughter of Asher, which I promised to tell you about. I told you. Hundreds of thousands of women surround her. 3 times every day they call out, Ho de Yokna de Yosef Tzadika Asa. Behold, the image of Joseph, the righteous, cometh. Remember Joseph, the many petticoated, whatever, many colored, multi, whatever? Yeah. The Nafkas the Gabi Pagoda Vada Chadar Isla, and Serach, the daughter of Asher, she She comes through the veil that is with her. And she beholds the beautiful light of the image of Joseph. And she celebrates. And she dances over to him. And she says, Zakar hayoma, what a beautiful time of the day it is now. Remember the time that I called out the news of your being alive to the grandfather. Now we know who Serach Bas Asher is. The oral tradition tells us like this. Remember the story of Joseph? He's like, his brother sells him. He ends up in Egypt, becomes a great master, prince, and all that, right? When the brothers come, they make up, they have a good time, they have a party. Now, meanwhile, the brothers unite with Joseph in Egypt, but the grandfather, Yaakov, their father, has been grieving Joseph all these years, thinking he was dead. The brothers now head back to Canaan to tell Yaakov that Joseph is alive. So the oral tradition tells us as follows. As they're approaching the land of Canaan, Yehuda, stops the brothers and says, boys, we got to think this through. You can't just go to Pa and tell him Joe's alive. Because it's been a long time. And the man's a very old man. It could kill him. He's been grieving for 20-some years just to say, Joseph is alive! Right? We don't want that to happen to him. Council time. So they sat in a circle and they had a council time. Asher, one of the brothers, raises his hand. He says, my daughter, your niece, Serach. She's a dancer. She's a storyteller. She is a singer. Why don't we ask my daughter Serach to go and sing and storytell and dance the news? That way it'll enter his heart gently and it won't kill the old man. The brothers agree. They go to Serach when they get to Canaan and they ask her, will you please sing, dance, and storytell that Joseph is alive to Pa, Grandpa? She goes and she sings and she dances and she storytells the news to the old man. The old man receives the good news, but he's so skeptical, having grieved and mourned all these years, that he says to her, Joseph is alive, like you're going to live forever. And so she does. Therefore she is mentioned among the people going into Egypt in the book of Exodus. And Jacob went down into Egypt. And these are the people who went down to Egypt, Reuben, Shimon, Levi, and Serach, the daughter of Asher. And she's mentioned 210 years later in the Exodus. And these are the leaders of the tribes that left Egypt. And Serach, the daughter of Asher. And so the ancient rabbis say, see, she lives forever. Because Jacob's joke, Joseph is alive, like you're going to live forever, came true. Because he had Ruach HaKodesh in that moment. And what he touched became eternal. His word, abracadabra. I create what I speak. Abracadabra is old Hebrew. I create, avra, I create, kedavra, as I speak. It's an old magical incantation. Yeah, it's Hebrew. Avra, I create, kedavra, as I speak. Talk to anybody who speaks Hebrew or Aramaic. So what he spoke became, right? Because our whole tradition is based on the power of speech, right? And God said, let there be, and there was, right?
God said everything.
Abracadabra.
Be careful what you ask for.
That's right. And the next chamber is Jochevet, the mother of Moses. She's the charge of the women there. The next chamber after that is Deborah, great prophetess. And the next chamber after that is Huldah, the prophetess, and so on and so forth. This is all in the Zohar. Zohar, volume what? Volume 3, folio 167b. You can read all about the chambers of the women's spirits. why wouldn't the word sent? It's like sometimes they're in heat, sometimes they have their period, they have menopause, they have puberty, they have drama. Women have drama in their lives. Men, what if the guy is walking around, all of a sudden there's a ball hanging down? That's a big drama, right? Nothing's bleeding, nothing's coming out, nothing's going in. There's something a little heavier where it used to be lighter. A woman, the second thing is that the woman is in that time, in that culture, and in some cases even in our time, we're involved in raising the children and taking care of things back at the ranch, keeping the fires going, so we couldn't obligate her to time-sensitive practices, because her time was what she was naturally doing in the culture of that era, that period, was more sacred and more important than running to synagogue or to a gathering to pray because it's the time for the afternoon prayer. Whereas a guy, men are, we're kind of whatever. We're like hanging around waiting for something to do. Didn't you ever drive by and see trucks with a hood up and men meditating? And they're, totally. So that's the second reason given why wouldn't the word sent. But as we will see, as we go through the rest of tonight, you'll see many examples of women who practiced all the things that men were practicing. And because, number one, they were not engaged in family. A lot of women chose not to have children, not to get married, so that they don't have to be stuck with some guy whose life begins to dictate their life. One of the women we'll talk about later was a woman, I wrote a book about her, who was banned. She was banned in Brooklyn. They called her Rabbi. She lived in these 1800s, early 1800s. Hannah Rachel Webermacher of Ludovic, Poland. And she became a great Hasidic Rebbe. People came to her from all over the country and got blessings and healings from her. And she was amongst many like her. But what made her very was not that she was a Rebbe, which means like a masteress, but that she was a Rebbe in her own right. She was not the daughter of a rabbi, that therefore gave her the qualification or the license. She was not the wife of a rabbi. She was not the mother of a rabbi. She was a woman who was a daughter of some schlepper, and some guy who ran a store and hardly knew anything. But she learned and studied on her own and went to the teachings and became a great teacher and a great healer, and people came to her from all over. And the rabbis who opposed her were opposed because they couldn't, they were not used to the idea anymore. Times have changed of a woman being in that kind of function and power, independent of the influence of a husband or a father. Yes? Oh, 2 thumbs up means I can continue?
So,
okay.
How come your book was banned?
Yeah.
Well, it was banned by Agudath Israel, which is the ultra-Orthodox organization, kind of umbrella organization. It was banned because they considered it a feminist tract and pornographic.
What was the pornographic about?
Well, there's a scene in there where...
Yeah, I was wondering if there's manuscript. Thank you.
Well, the book is out. I mean, the book, the book was sold by other people who were not Orthodox. In fact, my mother didn't believe me when I told her, when I sent her the ban letter, and she said that's ridiculous. She's an Orthodox woman, but she's from the old school, where they knew about the stories of Hannah Rachel. So she grew up with those stories. So she went into a bookstore in Brooklyn, in Borough Park, and said, "Do you have," they called her Rebbe? And the guy said, "No, we don't carry that book." So she said...
Your son wrote that book?
So she said, "Do you know where I can get it? Anybody else that sells it?" Says, "No, that book, they're not selling." So she was about to leave the store when he said, "Wait, come back. You really want this book?" And she said, "Yes." "All right, come here." Here you go. It was under the table the guy was selling my book, because he was also from the old school. Anyway, the problem is, fanaticism is something that is very, very energized in our times, clear across the board of all religions. So it was banned. Yeah, it was banned because the pornographic part was, there's a scene in there where she finally gives in to the pressure by the opposing rabbis of her time. There were supporting rabbis and there were opposing rabbis. And she decides that, okay, to get them off her back, she'll get married. And so she goes to her secretary, who's an older guy, and says he takes care of all the people that come to see her for blessings. She needed a secretary. So one of her disciples, a man, was taking everybody's number, and they didn't have phones back then, they had paper cups, And she said to him, let's do the marriage thing, but, no hanky-panky. This is just for show. And according to the story, what happened was that he agreed to this, to get these opposing rabbis off her back. And, of course, after a while, I don't like this thing. Talking about this sexual stuff. So after a while, he comes into her bedroom, according to the story, and says, we're married and I love you, and, I can't live like this anymore. So she throws him out. And that was the bedroom scene. He's having a conversation with her in her bedroom. So they didn't like that idea that should be in the book, even though that is what I read in the old recorded stories about her, what happened. And then she kicked them out, and they got an annulment, and she was controversial at the end of her time. And she died in Jerusalem, in a cave near Jerusalem, in one of the Judean hills, where she went to meet another old Kabbalist guy, and they both sat down to bring the Messiah in a meditation. And they did a big shamanic ritual there, and there she died. So the book is called They Called Her Rabbi, and it's available at a non-store far from you. 1-800-JUDAISM there is a bookstore in Pittsburgh. So,
Pick up the microphone.
huh? All right. Oh, the mic. Oh, I'm sorry. This is your microphone. Oh, I'm sorry. How's that? Okay. I'm sorry, Rick. Didn't mean to do that to you. There we go. Hope you feel better now.
When you were saying that bit about the women were exempt from time-sensitive practices?
Yes, time-oriented commandments. Yeah.
Were you implying that because time was not her own?
No, I was implying because she is connected to time, so she didn't need those kinds of practices. Those practices.
Nothing to do with the fact that she was, she did everything for her family.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing like that.
No.
You're not implying that.
No, I was implying that she is time. She has a biological relationship with time, with the sanctity and sacredness of time. So in other words, for example, in the Torah, in the Hebrew scriptures, it tells us the people were told that Shalosh Pamim Bashana Yeroeh Kol Zechorcha Et Pnei Adon HaKol. 3 times a year should every male, not female, every male come make the pilgrimage to the Holy Temple to behold the face of the Master of all. So the women came, as all the writings indicate. The women and men were there. There was a special place for the women, a special place for the men. So women did come, but they were not obligated to come. Men had to come. Men had to come to make the pilgrimage for the ceremonies that inaugurated spring, Passover, summer, Shavuot, and the harvest season, the fall, autumn, which is Sukkot, coming up soon, a theater near you. So those 3 seasons, we celebrate the beginning of seasons. So the beginning of spring, beginning of summer, beginning of winter, which is autumn. So this, the teachers told us, the ancient teachers taught, was the force of what we in our earthly places call, respectively, puberty, birth, and menopause. So puberty is spring, and birth is summer, and menopause is autumn, the going inward time, the ingathering time, all the wisdom time. So in autumn, the woman was wise woman, and then before that she was mother in summer, and before that she was adolescent, bat mitzvah, however you want to call it, in spring. The man does not experience this. He doesn't bleed when he's 13 years old. He just gets a check from his uncle for reading the Haftarah. The man does not experience birth. He experiences a tap on the shoulder after the woman he got pregnant gives birth. And he turns around and they drag his ass to the administrative office where he has to fill out forms, which is traumatic. The man doesn't experience menopause. You know, he just gets into this place where he has to buy a lot of Viagra. You know? So 3 times a year he had to come. He had to make the pilgrimage to the great ceremony of the shifting of the seasons, to connect himself, to compensate, to connect himself to the sanctity of the cycle change. The women did not have to come, but they came anyway. Just like they did not have to pray 3 times a day, yet women do pray 3 times a day in the Orthodox communities. My daughters, they pray 3 times a day, even though they don't have to. And sometimes they don't because they have kids. So, and also a woman was therefore not allowed to be summoned to court. In ancient Jewish law, a woman and a king were not permitted as witnesses, because you can only people who qualified as a witness, except in emergency cases, were people whom you could count on summoning to court. You could not count on summoning the king because he had a country to run, or a woman because she had the family to run. Now you might say, well, there are women who didn't have families and didn't want families. That's true, but the laws were based on averages. These are the average laws. And of course there were always exceptions to all the rules, and that's why it's important. That's why the fact is that we never could codify a Jewish law. All the attempts to codify a Jewish law from Maimonides' time and up were failures, because there are always exceptions to every rule in the Jewish way. So the Queen of Heaven, by the way, getting back to her, you'll find mention of her in the book of Jeremiah. About 3 times it's mentioned Jeremiah. In chapter 7, chapter 44, you have all these indications that the ancient worship of our ancestors involved not just God as the male deity, but God as a deity that was neither male nor female and was both. And that the Creator manifests in our experience in various manifestations, various attributes, sometimes masculine, sometimes feminine. Pita, bread, which is an ancient Aramaic blessing for after a meal, and all in the feminine. Berichach mana is in the feminine in Aramaic. Blessed is the compassionate one. Malka de Alama, queen of the universe. Mare de Hai Pita, the mistress of the bread. All in the feminine. And there are a lot of prayers like that. In fact, a lot of Aramaic is in the feminine automatically. And Rahmana, this is very interesting. The word compassion, which is the word, one of the names for God in our tradition, is Rahmana. Rahmana. Ancient Hebrew. More modern Hebrew. Rahmana. 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 And this is in English. Rahmana. Rahmana means what? It means compassion. But you know what else it means? I will tell you now what it means. Okay, so the root word is rachem. Rachem means compassion. It also means womb. 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 Rechem. Rechem means womb. Rachem means mercy, compassion. So one of the very often used names that our people use, especially in the 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, and BC for many centuries, is Rahmana. You know, there's a good book, actually, you can read all about this. It's called The Hebrew Goddess. It's been out for many years. It's written by Raphael Patai, P-A-T-A-I. It's available in paperback by Warner Publishing Company. The Hebrew Goddess. It's a really good book. It's written by a great Hebrew scholar who went through the sources in the scriptures and in the oral tradition to demonstrate how the goddess never died in Judaism. The goddess is an attribute of the divine that was worshipped in many venues and through many names. And then as we moved out of our independent way of living and had to adhere to other cultures where we were living, we had to take her and put her a little bit in a narrower place. So the great Queen of Heaven later becomes the Shekhinah, the divine presence in the world. So the divine presence of the Creator in the earth is called the Shekhinah, which literally means the dwelling. It's a feminine word. It means the dwelling, the she dwelling, she who dwells within, as my friend Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb translates it. And every Sabbath, every Friday before the Sabbath begins, the Kabbalists, the mystics had the tradition, and some still do it, of running out into the desert, into the hills, toward the setting sun to greet the Shabbat Malkitah, the Sabbath Queen. Who is the Sabbath Queen? She is a remnant. She is what we have left of what we used to pray to, the Queen of Heaven, Malkat Shemaya. In the teachings of our scriptures, you will also find great indications of the fact that, this is a lecture, right? Of the fact that the women of ancient Israel were very much involved in education. I do not speak of educating only, I was also referring to being educated. In a period of history when most of the cultures in that area were not educating their women as time went on, the women in Israel were being educated. You'll find this in the book of Exodus, chapter 21. You'll find it in the book of Numbers, chapter 5, book of Deuteronomy, chapter 17 and chapter 31. You'll find it in the book of Nehemiah, chapter 8. Throughout the Talmud, there are teachings about how the women would join and sit at the feet of the teachers, of the rabbis. It wasn't just a men's only situation. In fact, the Talmud also records many instances of women interrupting the rabbis and challenging them, and the ruling changes in midair because of the challenge of the women, which, by the way, also happens in the book of Numbers in the scriptures in the time of Moses. Remember the story of Moses is standing at the Jordan and saying, when you get across the Jordan and the land will be apportioned to every tribal member, every head, every male head of every household. And what does it say then? It says, Vatikavna banot Tzalafchat. And the daughters of Tzalafchat came marching over to Moses with frying pans and rolling pins. And they said, and what were their names? Their names were Machala and Tirzah and Noah and Chagla and, darn, I always forget the fifth one. Milcah. So the 5 daughters of this guy named Zelophehad come to Moses and Eleazar, the high priest, and the elders of Israel, the 70 elders, and they say, sorry, that doesn't sound like a divine inspiration to us. You know, I mean, we have no men in our family. We have no brothers. Our father died in the desert. You know, he tripped on a rock, he fell, he hit his head, he never got up. So you're telling us that we're going to get to across the Jordan, and the land of our ancestors will be apportioned to the tribal heads, and we're going to get skipped because we have no men in our family? And Moses doesn't say, how dare you challenge the word of God? Rather, Moses goes back to the phone booth and calls God up and says, and God responds and says, hey, Tzidkonios, they're right. They speak righteousness. You got that transmission wrong, Mo. In the rabbinic embellishment of this story, in this scriptural story, the ancient rabbis 2,000 years ago in the Midrash, they tell it like this. They said, when the daughters of Zelophehad heard this commandment, they said to each other, Lokem ma'aseh basar v'dam ma'aseh kuchabrichu. The ways of the Holy Blessed One is not like the ways of the human. The ways of the human, men look out for other men. They do what's best for other men. But the ways of God, it is written, Tov Adonai lakol v'rachamov al kol ma'asav. God is good to all, whose compassion extends to all creations. So let us go back to Moses and say, this does not sound like God. And that's when the story picks it up in a text, and they come and they challenge, and the law changes in midair and says, and if there are no men in the family, it goes to the women. Are you happy? Okay. Yeah. You know, there's I was reading this book. This is a book that you get like from a university, like one of these thesis books. This is from Brown, Judaic Studies Division. So there's a Professor Bernadette Bruton. Bernadette Bruton wrote a book. She wrote many books on different things. And women in Greco-Roman times, it means the 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century BC, mostly up to AC/DC. And she wrote a book about, one of her books in 1982, published by Scholars Press, is called Women Leaders of the Synagogue, where she goes back to the ancient times when synagogues first evolved after the fall of the Second Temple, and demonstrates through documents and recent archaeological revelations or uncoverings and diggings in Italy and Rome and in Jerusalem and in Caesarea, in the Galilee, where in uncovering old inscriptions they find more and more and more that the ancient Israelite women were very active, not only in the synagogue, building and making it happen, but in functionaries in the synagogue, religious leaders of the synagogue. Many of them were women. So you can look up her book on the web, or on, I don't know where you look up a university book, like a thesis book. So I don't know if it's like a popular one. Somebody gave it to me. Her name is Bruton, Brooten, Bernadette, and she wrote many scholarly works on different leaders of different religions, women in Christianity in the ancient times, and women in Greco-Roman culture, and so on and so forth. In the Talmud, which is the Jewish records of these, she got many of them from the Talmud, and many of the information also from inscriptions in synagogues that they have uncovered in Italy and in Israel. In the Talmud itself, there are a number of women who are mentioned in two different ways. Number one, women who are actively involved in discussions about Jewish religious law and practice. One of the most famous ones is Yalta. Another famous one is Bruriah. And then there are others who were like healers, women who taught healing, whose healing remedies are mentioned throughout the Talmud, such as Abba Ema and such as Ema Shalom. And these two women, their healing teachings, herbs and smudging and all that kind of stuff, are mentioned throughout the Talmud. Abaya, who lived in the 1st century, when all his teachings about faith healing and Kabbalistic healing always begins like this. My mother taught me, blah, 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 blah. My mother said, blah, 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 blah. The daughters of Rabbi Chisda, Emor Ravina, Emor Abai, there are a whole bunch of women who are mentioned in the Talmud throughout, who were, whose voice counted. In fact, the Talmud says the law is that when discussing new religious legal application, this is ancient law, 2,000 years ago, the vote of the women count. In other words, don't think that just because women are not involved in the same way as men are in all religious duties, they have their stuff and men have their stuff, this does not mean, the rabbi said, that they cannot register their vote, nor does it mean that their vote does not count as a majority. So if like there were 12 men and 15 women, and they were ruling on a law, and the majority voice was from the women concerning how the law should go, it went according to them. So there were two kinds of women that the Talmud mentioned. This is a straight line drawn the ancient Jewish way. So one was the religious teachers, women religious teachers, such as Beruria, who lived in the 2nd century. The Talmud tells us that Beruria, more than 300 legal conclusions were decided according to Beruria. This is found in the Tractate of Kelim in the Talmud. Several of them are there, where the rabbis are having a whole discussion about the religious legal implications of ritual purity and impurity concerning certain pots and pans, and the laws, and certain laws about the Sabbath and certain laws about Passover. And every time they rule on something, Beruria gets up and disputes them. And Rabbi Hanina, who's the great master of the time, keeps saying, her words are greater than all of yours. And the law becomes like sheep. So among the great religious teachers, so that's one. The second group of teachers, who are women, mentioned a lot in the Talmud, in many of the Talmudic stories. Another group of teachers are, how should I put it? How's this? Trickster teachers. There are many trickster teachers. For example, and then there were the daughters Valisha ben Avuya, who are mentioned, the daughters of Ravina, Ravashi, many daughters, many women who have no particular fathers and brothers. Okay, let me give you an example of a trickster teacher. A trickster teacher, most of them were called this. This is an important Hebrew word. You can read about these in my book that I wrote. That was not banned because it never got anywhere near those stores. Because it had the word sex in it on the cover. This is the Zona. There are many stories about the rabbis getting their bluff called. How do you say it in English? I don't know. Getting your bluff called? Calling your bluff? Okay. By the Zona. Rabbis visiting the Zona. Now in English, Zona is a biblical Hebrew word. It appears in the scriptures of the people. It is usually translated as prostitute. Literally, the word means nurturer. Like if you ever say grace after meals in the Jewish way, you say Baruch atah Adonai melech haolam hazon. The one, thank you God, you are the one who zones, who zonas. Prostitutes? I don't know what these people were thinking when they're writing this. I guess they're only thinking about one thing. Because there were guys that translated. And guys only think about cars. So Zona literally means nurturer. From the word zon, which means to feed. Right? If you're having sex and you don't feel fed, you haven't really had it. Zon. To feed. Let me give you some examples. For example, the Talmud, in my book, Sacred Secrets, which I translated a lot of these stories, because they're really powerful stories of rabbis, great teachers in the 1st century, 2nd century, 3rd century, going to these women, to the nurturers, to get fed. Now, whether that feeding was sexual or a nice bowl of chicken soup is up to our imagination. But in these stories, particular stories that the Talmud brings us, they're mostly about sex. So the rabbi goes to the Zona because he's horny. And the Zona invites him in, and they get ready to do it, and then she says something or does something to make him think about what he's about to do, which changes his whole life. So these are the other teachers, the trickster teachers, is a Zona. There are like maybe 18, 19 stories like that. For example, there's one story where there was a rabbi named Rabbi Eliezer ben Dordayo. Eliezer ben Dordayo lived in the 2nd century. He was a Galilean teacher. And he had many, many disciples, and he was a great master and all that. And there was not a single Zona that he had gone to. In other words, they weren't like streetwalkers. They were women who had the very independent life, and they had sex with whoever they wanted to. But not everybody that came to them got into their bed. They would come to the Zona. You would see the story about it in Joshua, in the book of Joshua, when the 2 scouts are hiding from the Jerichoites. And the Zona, it says a Zona takes them in, feeds them, hides them, takes care of them. No sex, just a little TV, coffee, cake, and she hides them. And then they spare her when they conquer Jericho. In fact, according to the oral tradition, she marries Joshua. Joshua marries her. And from them come 7 of our major prophets. Among them Habakkuk, Zephaniah, Hosea, and Deborah, and I forgot the others. So Joshua marries the Zona because she is the nurturer. It's like the sacred, I guess in English they call it the sacred prostitute, I don't know. So the Rabbi Eliezer ben Dordayo has visited every single Zona in all of Judea. He's bored. He hears about a Zona who lives 7 mountains away, 7 rivers away. Now, it's a fable, but maybe it's based on a true story. And she costs 700,000 zuzim, which can buy a lot of oxen. So he takes out his life savings, and he travels across 7 deserts, that's right, 7 deserts, 7 mountains, 7 rivers, to come to this Zona he's heard about, who costs so much. And he gives her all of his life savings. And she welcomes him to climb up 7 ladders, 7 steps to her bed. He does. He gets to the top, and she presses herself, pushes her abdominal muscles really hard until she farts. And he's totally turned off. And she says to him, "Look at you. You come all this way. You spent all this money. You traveled all these miles. And this, a little air coming out with an odor, is enough to turn you off. Can you then not see the folly of all that you have invested for a few moments of pleasure without anything else involved? Just coming to have sex without any relationship, sex without any connection, sex without any sanctity. As my fart," she says, "so would have been our sex." he leaves, he goes into the mountains, and there he sits between two great mountains, the story says. And he cries, and he weeps, and he says, oh my God, my entire life, what have I been doing with this great gift God has given me of sensuality? How I have wasted my sexuality on fly-by-night, one-night stands without any quality, any sanctity, any connecting with the women that I've been with. Blessed is this woman who has brought me to my senses. Woe unto me who all these years have I been teaching the Holy Writ, and yet in myself I have been empty. And he wept and cried until his soul left him. Another story has a student of Rabbi Akiva in the 2nd century sitting with thousands of disciples, probably means hundreds, maybe a couple dozen, in the hills of Jerusalem. A Zona is looking out her window, watching him every day. She can see him sitting in the hills under the trees, teaching these hordes of people. And she sees the angel Gabriel on his left and the angel Michael on his right. And she says to herself, what a great master this is. The angels are standing and sitting along his side of him, flanking him as he teaches. One day, the Talmud tells us, they happen to pass each other on the way. And he sees her, and he's so, enamored by her. He says to one of his disciples, arrange it tonight with her. See, we don't have rabbis like that anymore. A bunch of prudes trying to be so holy. You know? Those days they were very sexually liberated. By the time I got sexually liberated, the sexual revolution was over. I had missed it. I feel so frustrated about that. I was busy studying and meditating in Israel. I finally got to Berkeley. It was over. So, then what happens is, she waits for him. The disciple comes and arranges it. And that night he comes to her. And she says, put your face down there. This is in the Talmud. Put your face between my legs. This is going on public access TV. It's an X-rated discussion. He says, no, I do not wish to go there. So she says, well, then why are you here? I want to make love. I want to have sex. So she says, and go down there with your head. And he says, no, I don't want to. And so she says, don't you see the folly of it? You don't feel comfortable with my body at all. You just want one part of you to go inside another part of me without any, and in that connection, all that distance. You yourself, where you live, and your face, and your head, and your eyes, and your nose, and your mouth, and your senses, do not want to go to that place. You just want another part of you to go there. And so he's suddenly brought to his senses. And there's so many stories like this. In that story, he ends up marrying her. But there are a lot of stories like these in the Talmud that I translated. There's a great story of Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Safra, who prayed every day, please, oh God, help me, lead me not into temptation. And please, lead me not into... And his wife was listening, the Talmud says, and she said to herself, he never makes love to me anymore. Lead me not into temptation? What an idiot. I want him to be tempted. I want sex now. So she went and decided she would try to get him some other way. She dressed herself up as a Zona. Decorated herself with jewels and everything, and however they did it, went out with her tambourine, stood at the gate of the city of Jerusalem, and he's walking on his way to teach his disciples, his holy Rabbi Safra, and he sees this beautiful, sexy woman, and he says to her, who are you? Who art thou? King James English. And she says, oh, I am the Zona of Sepphoris. Sepphoris is a little Roman village up in Galilee, Roman Jewish village. And he says, wow, you're beautiful. She says, come with me. He says, I have nothing to give you. She says, give me a pomegranate off the tree. He takes the pomegranate off. They go into the bushes. They do it. He comes home later that night. His wife is, making pancakes. And he's sitting down. She says, you look terrible. You look very depressed. Are you okay? He says, no, I feel very, very bad and very guilty. I did something very horrible behind your back, and I'm really sorry, and I don't know what to do, and I feel like I'm just going into the oven and consuming myself. She said, what happened? Tell me. Well, I met this beautiful Zona at the entrance to the city. She was from Sepphoris, and I just couldn't help myself. I was so weak. I've been praying for God to please help me not be tempted, and I fell into it. She asked for a pomegranate, and I gave her, I'm so sorry. So his wife pulled out the pomegranate. Says, is this the one you happened to give her? He says, yeah. He says, well, it was I. See? Trickster teachers. He said, well, I still feel bad because I did it behind your back. Anyway, we can go on now. So we have the Zonot and we have the Rabbanim. We have the religious teachers like Brurian, Yalta, and Emodi Avina, and Emodi Abaya, and all these other great women teachers who are mentioned in the Talmud, by whose arguments and laws, the laws were changed and stuff like that, or laws were established for the people. And then we have the Zonot, the other teachers who taught the teachers, who taught the rabbis and put them in their place. In the early Middle Ages, moving up into the 9th century, 10th century, 11th century, you had a whole bunch of people. I mean, I'll just go through a really quick, just rattling off. I just wrote notes, of some people. You have, like Rabbi Shimon Duran in the 10th century, in his responsa literature, writing about Jewish law and applying it to different situations, he quotes the wife of one of his colleagues and her opinion. Rashi's daughters in the 1000s, wrote responsa, Rashi was Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, great master. And he wrote commentary in the Talmud, and he wrote responsa. Responsa means like, you come to me, you ask me, hey, Rabbi, what do I do, man? This is what the situation is. How do I apply the law or the practice? And so I will wrestle with you and wrestle with the texts and wrestle with the tradition, and then we'll come to a conclusion. And this is what you might want to do. And then I write it down in a book so other teachers can argue with me later, or you can use it for similar situations. So there were a whole bunch of women who wrote responsa. Rashi was one of the great writers of commentary in the Talmud. When he died, he didn't finish his commentary on the entire Talmud. His daughters completed it. And every yeshiva boy is studying the writings of the daughters of Rashi when they get to certain tractates. Chana, the sister of Rabbeinu Tam, was a great master in the 1100s, also wrote responsa, responses to questions. Yitzchak of Vienna quotes his mother-in-law. It was a good way to keep peace in the family. In his writings, I was reading his writings about, legal issues and Jewish practice back in that time, in the 12th century, 1100s. And he's quoting his mother-in-law again and again and again. Her name was Rachel. And then there's a woman named Alwina, who was the daughter of Rabbi Yehuda ben Natan, who wrote many responsa, Rivka Tiktina in the 16th century. She wrote a book called Meneket Rivka, which we're now finally putting back into print from old manuscripts. It was first published in Krakow in the 1600s. It's called Meneket Rivka, which means the nursemaid of Rebecca. Her name was Rebecca, and she wrote a whole commentary in the Torah and the Talmud and stuff like that. Then there's also, there were, like in the old days, even like today, you have parochial schools where you just study Jewish stuff. I went to one of those. I quit high school, even though it was a parochial high school, because there was too much English and math and history and social studies. I was such a holy man back in the old days. So then I went to Israel so I could just study nothing but Talmud and Torah and Tanakh and all that stuff, Kabbalah. So there's a thing called the yeshiva. To this very day, in the ultra-Orthodox traditional world, you have the yeshiva. Women go to yeshiva, men go to yeshiva. In the yeshiva, you study just religious stuff. Since we're in the Americas, we have to also teach social studies, geography, history, math. And so we sit there for like 20 minutes putting up with it, putting spitball, and just putting up with having to do that. I failed everything. I had to go to summer school to do geometry. You know, triangle, obtuse, that cute, I don't remember any of it. But the guy felt sorry for me and gave me a 65, and I got out of there. Now, the head of the yeshiva is an institution which is thousands of years old. It's like an academy. The prophets had their own yeshiva. The mystics had their own yeshiva, and the general public had their own yeshiva. The head of the yeshiva, the master of the yeshiva, the old man with a long white beard, walks around like this and looks at you in the eye all the time, makes you feel guilty for existing. This is the Rosh Yeshiva. Rosh means head, the head of the yeshiva. In the early days, my friends, there were women who were Rosh Yeshiva, who headed the yeshiva. Among them was Sarah, the wife of Rabbi Yaakov ben Yehuda. She did it in Kurdistan. The Kurdistan Jewish community, this is back in the 13th century. In the 14th century, you had Miriam Sapira and her daughter, Paola, like Paula, who was her daughter. They both wrote commentaries, which, by the way, we've discovered only recently in the library in Breslau in Russia. Old manuscripts, like so much stuff had been confiscated through the centuries and all the persecution that went on. So in the library of the seminary in Breslau, we found, it has been discovered, the writings of Miriam Sapira and her daughter Paola, commentary on the Torah. They both were heads of the yeshiva that Miriam's husband ran. So when he died, Miriam took over, and then her daughter took over, Paula took over. Dulce is sweet in Spanish. She was the daughter of the great Rabbi Eliezer in Italy back in the 16th century. And she ran a yeshiva there. And Bela, the wife of Yehoshua Falk, who was a great master of a yeshiva, she led the yeshiva in his time, in the 16th century, in Bohemia, near Czechoslovakia, that area. So when Rabbi Falk died, Bela, his wife, took over. When you move into the 18th century, you have the Hasidic Rebbes emerging, the Hasidic masters coming out of the woodwork when the Hasidic movement begins. And my God, I don't even know where to begin with the number of women who became Hasidic Rebbe women. Most of them were daughters of or wives of, like the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of the Hasidic movement in the early 1700s. He had a daughter named Odel. Odel was a healer. People came to her for healing, and she was a teacher. The Hasidim would come to listen to her teachings, especially after her dad died. Her daughter was Fega, who became the mom of Rabbi Nachman of Breslau, a great master. So Fega was considered by the people to have been endowed with the divine spirit, the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. She was a prophetess. She could tell things, she could see things. Merish, the daughter of Rabbi Elimelech of Gazinsk, he was a great Hasidic master in the 1700s. His daughter Merish was a great Hasidic teacher as well. Perla, who was the daughter of the Maggid of Mezerich, who was the disciple of Baal Shem Tov also. She was a great healer, and she also wore prayer shawls and tefillin, stuff like that men wear. Women don't. Freda, who was the daughter of Shneur Zalman, the founder of the Lubavitch movement back in the 1700s, also was a great Hasidic master. She wrote a lot of Torah's commentary. Rachel, the daughter of Avraham Heschel of Apt, taught Talmud. Chanachava, the daughter of Mordechai of Chernobyl, taught Kabbalah, and so on and so forth. I mean, there's so many. I just wrote a few of them down in my notes. Malka, who was the wife of the great master Shalom Rokeach. And then there were the non-husband, non-daughter of people, like Adel, who became a great Hasidic Rebbe, or Malka of Trisk, who became a great Hasidic Rebbe, or Sarala, of Te'umim, or Chana Bracha, or she wore a talit and she gave blessings and healings to people. Yenta the seer, who was initiated by the Baal Shem Tov, ordained by the Baal Shem Tov to be the rabbi of the village, and Chana Rachel of Webermacher, the one I wrote the book about, and so on and so forth. So those are just a few little examples I'm just spitting out at you of the involvement, active involvement of women in the ancient times, through the early medieval times, through the late medieval times, through the 2 centuries ago, where they were very active in the community, in synagogue function, in teaching, in healing, in blessing, and so on and so forth. And then, we go into this place where we just drop everything and we go kaput, and now we resurrect it and think we're reinventing the wheel. So I'm here to tell you that we have not reinvented anything with the idea of women spiritual leaders. We've had them for centuries. Yes?
What did you mean when you described the one woman as being endowed with Ruach HaKodesh? Aren't they all?
No. Next question.
Hold it.
Well, you see, what is Ruach HaKodesh? It's a word we use very glibly today, but in those days, when you read the old writings, when they say somebody had Ruach HaKodesh, it's very rare they say that about anyone, even men, women, or dogs. So let me explain a little bit about this. We call that the Holy Spirit, imbued with the Holy Spirit. We say that glibly in English, but Ruach HaKodesh is something very high. Okay, look. You have prophecy, and you have Ruach HaKodesh. And you have Hebrew, sorry. My language is mixed up here. You have Chi Zion. Okay? Those are the 3 main things you have. So, it's the next, oh man, I love this stuff. Right, Neviut. Okay, prophecy. This is Holy Spirit, and this is seeing. Seeing is believing. These are the 3 major levels of spiritual empowerment in the Jewish mystical tradition. So you have Neviut. Neviut means, can mean anywhere from suddenly experiencing the Creator Spirit emanating and resonating through you and giving you visions, galore of things to come, visions of truths unknown to anybody else, to just simply telling you to go and say something to somebody else, as we have in many stories in our scriptures. So Neviut literally means the one who brings, like we said at the beginning of the evening, the one who brings the vision to the people. Maimonides, Rambam, Moshe ibn Maimon, in the 12th century, he writes that the Nevi'im, the vision bringers, I'm not leaving, I'm just getting a little chilly. The vision bringers were of 2 kinds. One kind is just sitting around minding your own business, and then the visions come. Pow! And the word comes to you, the resonance comes to you. Not God speaks to you, but the resonance comes. Because the word that's used when it says God spoke to the prophets, to the Nevi'im, is Vaidaber. Daber means resonating. Does not mean talking. Vayomer means talking. Hi, how you doing? What's going on? What's new? And Daber means resonating. So Moses experienced resonance. And then he has to translate the resonance into mortal language, mortal vernacular. So one kind of prophecy is just hanging around, doing your lawn or whatever, and all of a sudden, pow, you're hit by the resonance. And it's out of your control. And then they put you away. The other kind is called the inducing Nevi'ut, which is a lower level. This is, it says, B'nai HaNevi'im, the children of the Nevi'im, meaning the disciples of the Nevi'im, men and women alike, would drum and chant themselves into ecstasy. And in the ecstasy, I will now demonstrate, I'm just kidding, I'm not going to demonstrate, but I will sing you a song that's 2,800 years old to the woman in honor of her with this drum. There. So they would drum and chant themselves into ecstasy, thereby inducing, bringing the channel down. That's the second level of prophecy, as opposed to suddenly you're hit because you are the chosen messenger of this particular message. Ruach HaKodesh, or literally Ruach is spirit, HaKodesh the holy. The Holy Spirit is something very different. The Holy Spirit has to do with the Shekhinah, has to do with the feminine indwelling of the divine that rests upon you. So it's not necessarily going to be something that comes to you with a message or with a vision. It's going to be rather the dwelling, the resting upon you, so that whatever you touch gets healed. Or you can touch a little flask of oil that has one drop and it becomes a gallon. Or you can, as all the stories in our tradition teaches us, many, many stories about materialization, materializing something that doesn't exist. So in other words, it's being imbued with the power of the Creator through the Creator's dwelling within creation. This power is not just from the sky, this power is from the earth. This has to do, the mystical teachings say, from the story in Genesis where God says, Totzei ha'aretz nefesh chaya, earth bring forth living soul. Translated often in the English translations as bring forth living beings, but the word is nefesh, which means physical manifestation of soul. Nefesh is one of the names for soul. The earth brings forth a particular attribute for the soul that meets the attribute given from the beyond. The two come together and become the complete soul. So the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit thing, is being imbued and enveloped in the Shekhinah, in the Creator's presence in the earth, so that you can connect the supernal with the natural, the supernatural with the natural. And these were the healers, the great faith healers of our tradition and other traditions. Chizayon is the next level, which is the seeing. This is the power to see. This is the power given to certain people to be able to look into your eyes and see you. See your soul, like Isaac Luria and many others who were able to look and see. Somebody came to Isaac Luria in the 16th century because that's when he lived, and said, I want to be your disciple. And Isaac Luria said, well, let me first see you. And he looked into the windows of his soul, his eyes, and he said, you're not bad, but there's something not too good either that you got to take care of first before you can become my disciple. So the man went home and he racked his brains out, trying to figure out what it was he'd done wrong. He couldn't find anything. It was perfect. He was good to his woman, he was good to his animals, he was honest in his business. He came back to the master a few weeks later and says, I've been trying to figure this out and I can't. What am I doing wrong? And the rabbi said, what do you do for a living? He says, well, I raise chickens. All right. What's the first thing you do in the morning when you wake up? I do what every good practicing Jew does. I don't eat, I don't drink, I go straight to the prayer, to pray to God. And the rabbi says, that's your problem. How can you stand before God in the morning praying to God for your sustenance when the chickens are going? Translation. Chickens are very hungry. They want their breakfast. The first thing you need to do in the morning before you get up is not pray to God, but to feed your chickens. And the man got it. So the seer is the one who's able to see clearly through all the veils. Any questions? Any answers? There's a lot more to learn about all this, just trying to put all this into a little 2-hour thing that we had here tonight. But what I'd like to leave you with is what Paul Harvey always says. And now you know the rest of the story. Or rather, to paraphrase it, there's a lot more to anything than it's cracked up to be. There's so many great teachings about all this stuff. I'm going to do a little Hebrew song, chant, to entertain you. And it's 2,800 years old. The words are written by King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech. He was the only king in our entire Jewish history, our entire tumultuous Jewish history, during whose reign there was total peace. No war. 40 years of no war. Well, more than 40 years. During his whole reign, there was not a single war. My theory of why that is because he had 1,000 wives. And when did he have time? No time. So I urge women to keep their men in bed long, and there'll be world peace that way. I hold women responsible for not keeping their men in bed long enough. If they would keep the men in bed longer, there would be no war. May these words go forth to all the nations, for thus hath I spoken. So Solomon wrote a beautiful ode to women in 2 different scriptural books. One at the very last chapter of the book of Mishlei, Proverbs, which is a song I will sing you, Ode to the Woman. And the second one is an entire scriptural book in our tradition called the Shir HaShirim, Song of Songs, which is a very erotic scriptural writ about the love between 2 lovers, between a man and a woman. There are also stories about love between women and each other, like Ruth and Naomi, and the love between a man and a man, like David and Jonathan. The words mean, I don't know what the words mean. It means the woman of valor, who can find? Her worth is beyond rubies and stones and precious stones. Neither snow nor rain keeps her from doing the things that her family needs, her home needs. She bakes the bread for the poor and for the Canaanite who is in need. She takes all the raw materials, weaves it into fruition. Flax into clothes, wool into sheets and cloaks, wheat into bread, gifted child. At the end of the day, she has a last laugh. Her mouth opens up with wisdom, the words of compassion upon her tongue. She guides the ways of her household, while her man is out there with the elders looking under the hood of a truck. Vain is the charm that she puts out compared to the inner beauty of her spirit and the sanctity of her power. Her husband is busy praising and singing her praises at the gates of the village. Oh, please, Creator, give to her the gift of the fruits of her labors, the fruits of her hands, and let her actions be sung in praise songs at the gates of every village. Ishes chayil mi metzah verachok mi panini michabotach pon lebala veshala lo yesach kimlasu tov v'loa kol yemei chayeha Zemmer wichtig, das bechefetz kapeha. Ay sakani osochem yechak tavilach matakom mi'olayla titin terev levesa bechok naraseh azamamasa levatikacheu mi priyoter vi hallelujah ad vashor imala. Du schütze mer ufishtim vatas bechifetz kapero oso kani osochem imechak tavilachemo Vatakam be'olayla, vatitin tereble vesa v'chok v'naseh hazam masod v'tigareyo mipricha peha natakarem chogro biyoz mosnecho vata'ametz v'rosero toma kitov sacha la yichbe balayla יודע שילך בקישו וחבר תמך פולך הפפוסטוליאני ויודע שילך לא אביונו סירו לביסה משולק כי כל ביסה לבושנים בשערים בעלה בשבתו עם זקני הארץ עדין נססה ותמכו וחגו נוזנו לכנעני עוז וידו לבושו ותשחק ביום האחרון פי אפוסו וחכמו וסורס חסד הלשונה Sofio lichos besov lechem astus lo sofer Kamu voneo vayashua bala vayalelo Ravos panos asu choil viator lisa kulana שקר החן והבל היופי אישה יראת אדוני היא תזהלדו לה מפרי ידיה ויהללו בשרים מעשה Good night. You can go now. Go away. It's late. Huh? Anybody have any questions? No, they know everything.
I do.
You do? What is that?
It's trivia.
I love
Who's
trivia.
the person, starts with a T, Tahir or somebody, who imitated a prostitute? Was she imitating a Zona? Or,
Tabita.
what's her name?
Tabita?
Yes.
Tabita.
Yeah, which was she imitating?
Yeah, the sacred one, sacred prostitute.
So that's why it's been okay to have a scripture and she
That's right.
contribute what she did.
Exactly. Tabita.
Wow.
Tuviata. Tabita from the Aramaic, which means good God, or the goodness of God. Tabita. That's right. Very good. T-A-B-I-T-A in English? What's that? Tabita. Tabita. T-A-B-I-T-A in English. Tabita.